Okay, I'm Erin Somerville at McCallum High School going over Congressional Organization. So Congress has an awful lot on its plate that it needs to get done in each legislative session. And there are a lot of folks in Congress. You have 100 in the Senate, you have 435 in the House of Representatives. So you have a lot of people that might have their own particular interests with regards to what they need to do for their constituents, their own ideas about what the federal government should be doing. So there's going to need to be a way to organize so that work can actually get done. And I'm going to go over the organizational framework of Congress. So we have 535 people, and we'd love to think of these 535 people participating daily in wonderful debates, but that just might not be the reality of how Congress works. Not every bill is discussed by every member of Congress, and logistically that would be very difficult to accomplish and probably not very effective. So our topics for the organizational leadership, I'm going to go through the committee system, leadership positions, and then party and seniority in both chambers. So if you like to have a nice framework for your notes, those are the major topics I'm hitting. All right, so the committee system. Both chambers of Congress divide out the work in committees. And this is because there's just too many bills, too many opinions, and not enough expertise. So there are 4 kinds of committees, and you can look in Chapter 12 to see these, get definitions and examples. But the standing committee is the one I'm going to talk the most about right now. A standing committee is a permanent committee. It deals with a particular topic, a particular subject. And the reason that Congress forms these committees is what you can do is by putting together a group of, say, 10 to 15 representatives in one committee and tell them they're going to be experts on these kinds of bills. So, you have the Agricultural Committee, the House Agricultural Committee. That means that the representatives who get to be in that committee, they're the ones that are going to see bills with regards to agriculture. So maybe some sort of dairy subsidy bill, if it comes up in Congress, instead of the full chamber looking at it, send it to those folks on the committee who are more experts on this, and they can decide if the bill needs tweaking, if it's worth everybody's time, or if not. If it's not worth everybody's time, they can quickly neglect it, and the rest of Congress will not know about the bill. So those are standing committees. You have them both in the House and in the Senate. And I just want to make sure we understand. These are members of Congress. So, you elect your senators and your representatives, and then once they're in Congress, many of them are going to seek out positions on a committee because that's where the power is. It's in committee that you're going to actually look at particular bills and get to exert your power over that area. And not everyone starts off in a committee as an expert, but the idea is they stay in that committee and then they can become more of an expert on that topic. So the more time you serve in Congress, in theory, the better you will be suited for the committee that you're working on. There are 3 other kinds of committees. You're expected to know those, so look at those from Chapter 12. And they also are ways that Congress divides up work. But when we think about the legislative process and passing laws, it is very helpful to have a committee look at the bill first before taking up the time on the floor of the entire chamber. Now these committees, they're composed of members from each party. So you'll have some Democrats, some Republicans. But the chairperson, so the person who has more power on the committee, the chairperson is from the majority party. So when the House has a majority of Republicans, then the chairperson of every committee will be a Republican. And if that changes, like in another election, many Republicans are voted out of office, some Democrats win those seats in the House back, and now you have, say, a majority of Democrats in the House of Representatives, well then each chairperson will be a Democrat, as long as the Democrats hold a majority. It works this way in both chambers. So let's explore this. You'll notice the first 2 bullet points. Work is efficient and slow. And those look contradictory, and they are. It is efficient to not waste all 535 members' time and not devolve into 535 people arguing over a bill that they might not fully understand. And they might, if we think about congressmen, they're very, very busy with a number of other topics, concerns, constituencies. So it could be efficient to have each committee look at bills before being sent to the full chamber for debate. But then you can see how that slows things down. Many bills make it into committee, and then the committee reviews it, and they don't recommend it. They don't push it forward in the legislative process. So other representative senators, they might not even know about this bill, that it was discussed and what was discussed about it. Also, you have committees that are all working independently of one another. So sometimes what happens is legislation is proposed that is not cohesive. It could almost be contradictory because there's not like a single authority to really pool all the committees together to make sure that they're striving for one singular goal. And that, again, is because there is no centralized power. You could say in the Senate you have some major leaders, and in the House you have some leaders, the Speaker of the House, but their actual power to really control the chamber is quite limited. So we should think of power as decentralized, even when we have a leader, and that leader does have some big powers. We'll go over specifically the Speaker's powers and the Majority Leader's powers in the Senate. Even though they have some awesome powers, it is not a set of powers that allows them to make everyone fall in line in their chamber. Also, these committees meet behind closed doors. So the public largely doesn't know what Congress is doing. When we go to the full chamber looking at something, that is easily accessible for the American people. But Americans have trouble understanding Congress. It's obscured by the committee system. And Madison did warn. He didn't talk about committees, but he warned that the legislative branch was the one that would be hardest to control, because we know from Article 1, Section 8, the enumerated powers, Congress was given huge powers. The federal government has amazing powers. But the legislative branch would be composed of many people. There wouldn't be a singularity. It would be hard to hold Congress accountable because of how large that branch is. And that branch also has the power to tax us. So this would be the bigger beast that would be harder for the American people to understand and control. Contrary to what most people would quickly think, oh, the president is our big concern. Madison said, no, presidents, like dictators, they're on our radar, and we are always trying to rein in their power. What we overlook would be your legislative branch, the one in which it's hard to point the finger at any one person and really hold the entire body's feet to the fire on anything because of how large it is. Okay, so Congress, we have the committee system divides up work. We could argue it's efficient. We could also argue it's inefficient. This here shows you the, this here shows you leadership in Congress. So we have two chambers. You have the Senate and the House. Now, I have made these boxes these sizes for a reason. So in the Senate, constitutionally speaking, there are two leaders, meaning when we looked at Article 1, we saw in Article 1 that the VP was the president of the Senate, but really his only task was to break a tie-breaking vote. Knowing that the VP probably wouldn't be present, presiding over the Senate very often, the Constitution also lays out the position of President Pro Temp. This person is chosen among the senators. So we elect 100 senators to the U.S. Senate across the country, and then the senators choose who will be their President Pro Temp to preside. And of course, that President Pro Tem is not there every day either, so they can substitute in other senators to preside when needed. Those, though, I've made those boxes small, but they're at the top, so I want to understand they're constitutionally leadership positions. But down here are the other officials, and arguably the more important, powerful officials. So you have your majority leader, and you have your minority leader. The majority leader is going to be the person chosen from the senators of the majority party. So if your U.S. Senate is controlled by the Republicans, as it is in January of 2016, the Republican senators choose from among themselves a majority leader, and they have at this time Mitch McConnell. I will have a link with all the current officials, and so what I say right now might not be as current as when you're watching this, so I'll keep the link current with the names. So Mitch McConnell is the Republican majority leader. He was not always. When the Democrats had a majority in the Senate previously, it was Democrat Harry Reid. So Harry Reid is sort of the senior leader of the Democratic senators. He now is minority leader. So the Democrats in the Senate have a leader, and the Republicans in the Senate have a leader. Now the leader really controls the floor. So the two leaders will discuss when to take a vote on something, when to have debate on something. They really control the procedures and whether or not a vote really gets to be discussed on the floor. Below each of them, you have the whips, and the whips are the people who whip up the votes. So the majority whip is going to be a fellow Republican if the majority leader is a Republican. The minority whip is going to be a fellow Democrat if the minority leader is a Democrat. And what they do is they are a little bit behind the scenes. We know who they are. It's not that they're not known, but they're going around talking to other senators to discuss, how are you going to vote on the bill? If that bill were voted on today, would you be voting yes or no? Why? Can you be persuaded? So the whip is trying to persuade votes, but also trying to just keep a tally so that they can report to the leader if there were a vote today, it would pass or it wouldn't pass. And that affects the leaders when they're deciding when to vote on something. So the whip has a very important job of knowing fellow senators, knowing what their concerns are, knowing how they might vote, knowing how you might be able to sway them this way or that way. And then reporting that to the leaders so the leaders can, time their request for votes. Okay, sliding over to the House of Representatives. You have the Speaker of the House. This person is at the top and is a really big box. That is because the Speaker is an officer actually designated in the Constitution. So it says in the Constitution that the representatives in the House shall choose a Speaker. So this is a fellow representative. And this person is chosen from the majority party. And currently, that is now Paul Ryan, who just replaced John Boehner, who stepped down, a Republican. So the Speaker of the House is pretty much equivalent to the majority leader here in power. And also has a leader and a whip below them that does similar things. And over here is the minority leader. Currently, January of 2016, this is Democrat Nancy Pelosi, and she used to be the Speaker of the House when the Democrats had the majority. But in 2010, the Democrats lost the majority. The Republicans took back power in the House, and they switched the gavels. Okay, so we've gone through the committee system. Here you have the officers in both chambers. And I'll have a link with the current ones. You really should know the current ones, leaders and speaker. You don't necessarily need to know the whips. Now let's think about party and seniority and the role that they play. The majority party has great power. What most people assume is the great power is that if they have a majority of the seats, they could pass all the bills they want because they have the majority needed to pass legislation. That is not really where the power lies. It's so much more than that. The power really lies in how the party can control what is discussed, what bills make it out of committee. That's because the majority party has all the chairmanships. So when we talk about work being divided, those committees have a huge amount of power in filtering out what legislation is actually discussed. And the party has all the chairmanships. So when the majority party switches, then chairmanships switch too. And then you saw all the major leadership positions, specifically the Speaker and the majority leader in the Senate, have a lot of power in controlling the docket. what is going to be voted on and when. They control that calendar, and that's a huge power, because whether or not you have the numbers to pass a bill or stop a bill, if you have the control of whether or not the bill is even discussed, that's the real power. So party plays a huge role in Congress. It might not play as huge of a role lately in our election politics or for the president, but still within Congress, party is a big deal. Seniority in Congress. Seniority is still really important, but the trend is it's becoming a little less important. Seniority was what got you those awesome committee positions, and because that experience helps you not only get reelected by your constituents, but when you are reelected over and over and over again, that means you become a better congressman and a better expert on a committee. And seniority varies. Like in the House, seniority is much more important in the Senate. I don't want that to feel like something you're memorizing. I'm going to try and explain why. There are more representatives in the House. There's 435. So needing to control, manage, and get 435 people working together, you're just going to have more rules in place, more formality. And because you have that, you have more formality, seniority is going to be part of that formality. So in the House, the longer you're there, the more power you can exert, really. Whereas in the Senate, there's only 100 senators. And we're seeing that senators can rise really quickly even without a lot of experience. That their personalities and their appeal to Americans is letting them rise in power in the Senate faster. And I guess the best way to think about that is there's fewer senators. So you can have a shooting star pop up to prominence in the Senate and even in national politics. So that could explain Barack Obama and Ted Cruz's rise, who were not in elected office very long, but were able to rise to power. When you're one of 100, you are in the national light more easily. So seniority, still important in both chambers. Party, still important in both chambers. But if you're comparing the House and the Senate, party and seniority would be more important in the House, because the House has to rely on those for organization and leadership a little bit more because it is the larger body. Whereas in the Senate, with less formality, party and seniority might not be as big. Well, specifically, seniority is not as important. Party is still quite important in the Senate. Okay, so that was congressional organization.